Welcome. It must really be fall. We're starting again. My name is George Thrush. I'm an architect. I founded the School of Architecture here at Northeastern and have been involved with it since, well, before you were born probably. And it's very satisfying. I enjoy it very much, and I've taught lots and lots of courses about architecture. This is not one of them. This course is about thinking in a different way. It's about design thinking, how designers think. And one of the ways that we're going to find out how designers think, hey, folks, as you're coming in, please come up and sit a bit closer. There's plenty of room up here. One of the ways that we'll find out, or the primary way that we'll find out how designers think, is we'll talk to 22 different creative people, not just architects, not just designers explicitly, not just people who are designers by title, but engineers, business people, advertising executives, all kinds of people. But the thing that they have in common is that they think like designers. And what I mean by that is they have learned how to solve complex, multivariable problems through a method. Being creative is not actually magic. It's not something that nobody could possibly teach you. It's not true at all. I'm going to teach you at least a bit of it in this course, and I hope that it will open some doors for you and allow you to expand how you solve problems in your area. You know, in that vein, maybe just as we're getting started, could I get a show of hands for how many of you are business students? Could you raise your hands? Okay. And how many are engineering students? Ah, va bene, va bene. And how many are social sciences or humanities students? Okay. What am I leaving out? How many are College of Arts, Media, and Design students? Okay. Well, I'm in the College of Arts, Media, and Design, obviously, but I'm delighted actually to see so many engineering students here. This is actually something that in American engineering schools we could do better, is to teach explicitly about design. And so I think this will be a great additional set of information for you to go along with your engineering education. When I think about my own background as an architect, it's instructive in this sense, but it's not the only thing, because one of the things I tell the faculty in our School of Architecture is it is not our job to reproduce ourselves, that is for the faculty to reproduce the careers that we've had for you. Rather, our job is to empower you to be successful in a dramatically changing world. And I think learning more about design is a great, great way to do that. So if we're successful in this class, we will have opened doors for you in terms of how you think about problems and how you go about solving them. One of the things that led me to the idea that it's not our job to reproduce ourselves is the notion of empathy. Everybody knows what I mean when I say empathy. Unlike sympathy, which is I can feel for you, I feel that you're sad about something. Empathy is actually feeling the same feeling and feeling as someone else does. I would say it is a more profound exercise than sympathy. Empathy is really trying to imagine yourself in another's shoes, viewing the world from another's point of view. And there's nothing that is more probably transformative about the way we think about design today in all fields than the notion of empathy. Not thinking about things only from the perspective of you, the maker or designer, but thinking about the world from the perspective of the user, the customer, the person experiencing the website, the person entering the building, etc. So this notion of empathy is one we are definitely going to come back to. I want to just reiterate that this is not about turning you all into architects. I know this course has an architecture number. It would take more than one course to do that, and that's really not what I'm trying to do. what I am trying to do is really expand your world a bit, and I hope that we can do it. You'll meet, as I say, over 20 creative leaders from all these fields, and I hope that you will really learn a great deal in this course. A couple of housekeeping issues. The guy who precedes us, Professor Emmett Price of music, teaches the course called Jazz. He's fantastic. If you ever come a few minutes early, you should sneak in the back and listen to him. He's just the greatest public speaker you've ever heard. And something that he does is actually get into a great amount of detail about engaging and interfacing with Blackboard. All of you are familiar with Blackboard, the web-based portal. We'll be uploading, your syllabus is already loaded onto the Blackboard site for this class. After every session, I will upload the PowerPoint of the guest so that you will be able to see that and refer to it when you want to. It's how we'll communicate with you. We have 5 TAs in this class. I'll introduce them in a second. But they are going to be your primary interface when it comes to issues, any logistical issues that have to do with Blackboard or questions about assignments and so forth. You are required to attend this class. I'll tell you a little secret. If you attend this class and do the assignments, you'll do very well in this class. This is not the hardest class in the university. A great way to not do well in this class is to not attend. So if you'd like to get a bad grade, that would be an excellent way to do it. The other thing I want to say is, nobody likes to talk about it, but I need to say it explicitly. And it's a point about academic honesty. And I'm sure you've heard this in other classes, but I want to reiterate it. The questions that you'll be asked in this course are not like math questions. There's not a single right answer. So we will be asking you for your own thoughts. And please provide us with your own thoughts and not the thoughts of others. If you do refer to other people, which is completely fine, you know how to quote them and make sure that you have documented and referenced that you've quoted them, okay? As easy and as tempting as cutting and pasting things off the internet is, it's just as easy for us on the academic side to see that you've done that. And that's, you don't want to have academic honesty issues with the Office of Campus, whatever it is, the OCCR, I forget what it's called, conflict resolution or something. It sounds very neutral, but it's basically the punishment team. So you don't want to get involved with that, and really don't. Okay, so with all that caveat, let's get started. Let's get started. Give me a second here. Let's see if we can get this thing back up. Okay. Give us a second. It's day 1. I'm sure it's going to come up in a second. There we go. This is our opening problem. Shannon has lost her cat. We don't know anything about Shannon right now. But she's asked her friend, who is a designer, to please make a poster to help her find her cat. And this is the poster that her designer friend has made. And this is Shannon's response. Yeah, that's not what I was looking for at all. It looks like a movie, and how come the photo of Missy is so small? Dear Shannon, it's a design thing. The cat is lost in the negative space. Regards, David. Okay, that's just stupid. Can you do it properly, please? I'm extremely emotional over this and was up all night in tears. You seem to think this is funny. Can you make the photo bigger and please, and fix the text and do it in color, please? Thanks. Okay, what is going on here? Okay, this is worse than the other one. Can you make it so it shows the whole photo of Missy and delete the stupid text that says missing Missy off of it? I just want it to say lost. Well, you knew this was coming. You knew this was coming. Yeah, can you do the poster or not? I just want a photo and the word lost and the telephone number and when and where she was lost and her name. Not like a movie poster or anything stupid. Okay, now we're getting there. Wait a minute, that's not even my cat. Where did you get that picture from? That cat is orange. I gave you a photo of my cat. There we go. Now, finally, Missy the cat, reward offer $2,000, missing from Harper Street. Now we're getting somewhere. I didn't say there was a reward. I don't have $2,000. What did you even put that in there for? Apart from that, it is perfect. Can you please remove the reward bit? Thanks, Shannon. No reward. Can you please just take the reward bit off altogether? I have to leave in 10 minutes and I still have to make photocopies of it. Ding. Okay, clearly Shannon and David have a communication problem. I don't know if any of you have seen this bit on the web before. I saw it earlier this year. I'm sure lots of people have clicked on it. We all get these things sent to us every day. But I thought this one was particularly delicious because it really does capture the question of empathy. Clearly David and Shannon are not on the same page. Can we agree on that? So what's lacking here is empathy. David is interested in a bunch of things from his perspective as a designer, and Shannon just wants her cat back. They're two different things, and so they're not solving the same problem. So what we're going to do is try to get at these kinds of issues in understanding design. I'm going to give you a little, if you want to write something down today, you can write this down. There'll be two things that you should write down today. First, this, which is a working definition of design thinking. Design thinking is kind of the, it's a discipline or an approach that has emerged in the last 10 years, 15 years, that takes the reality that people who design things have to work in a very iterative way. They have to look at a lot of different options in how they arrive at solutions. And business people, engineers, software companies have really started to realize that there's a way of codifying this way of thinking. And so a working definition from the D School at Stanford is a human-centered, prototype-driven process for innovation that can be applied to product, service, and business design. And we will have guests in all of those areas this semester. So we're going to talk about 5 basic processes, and these 5 words are going to be the second things that you're going to write down today. And the rest you can just kind of pay attention to, because it'll be, remind you, I'm going to post these PowerPoint talks on the Blackboard site every time right after they're done, okay? Mostly they won't be by me, they'll be by the guests. So 5 basic processes that will guide us this semester. The first, as we've said, is empathize. Understand the experience, the object, the process from the point of view of another. The second is define. What is the nature of the problem to be solved? And in this talk, I'm going to give you some very clear examples of how understanding the problem and what the problem is to be solved is absolutely essential and yields very different results. And I'll give you several examples in a minute. So what is the nature of the problem to be solved? The third term is a kind of recently developed word, ideate or ideate. And that is really about thinking of multiple solutions to the problem, each addressing a particular aspect. Think of it, here's another word, it's like brainstorming, okay? Coming up with lots of different solutions, ideas about solutions. It's like throwing spaghetti against the wall and seeing what sticks, okay? But it's critical to come up with more than one idea. Why is it critical to come up with more than one idea? Because often there's more than one aspect to a problem. There's more than one variable. Think about it, we have a lot of engineers in the room. Think about even a simple device. There's all kinds of variables in terms of the ergonomics of it, let's say the mechanics of it, let's say the weight of it, let's say the look of it. Do you know what I mean? There's a lot of different things that are variables in that equation. The fourth term is prototype. And again, for the engineers, this is, sure, I know, yeah, that's fine, of course. But for everybody else, the idea of a prototype is, I would say, it's the initial synthesis of a problem into a single solution. So synthesize the solutions into a product design, a website, a building, or an experience. And again, we'll see examples of all of these. And finally, and this is the secret to this list, and this list, by the way, is really a circle, because you empathize, you ideate, you prototype, you empathize, you define, you ideate, you prototype, and you test. You constantly test. For those of you who are in computer science, you've probably, and maybe in engineering too, you've heard the term fast fail. How many of you have heard the term fast fail before? Oh, not that many, okay. So the idea about fast fail is a way of, it comes from the software world, I believe. And the idea is, rather than spend months and months and months writing code for a software project and then testing it, you write as little code as you can and test it right away so that you can fail as quickly as possible. The idea is to fail fast. Of course, not to end it there, but to fail fast and find out what doesn't work right away so that you move on to accumulate things that do work quickly, as opposed to building the whole thing and then saying, oh, there was a really easy, obvious flaw in this from the beginning, but we just spent $1 billion developing a flawed enterprise. So testing is very important. Test your solution, measure its failures, and as they say on the side of the shampoo bottle, repeat. You complete the circle and you do it again. So a little break, a little break in the presentation about the course logistics, just to remind you. So obviously we're Mondays and Thursdays, 11:45 to 1:25. You can meet with me by appointment at this email address, g.thrush@neu.edu. But I encourage you, and I'll share the TA's information in a moment. They're also on Blackboard. So what are the metrics for this course? How are you going to be graded? There are several different opportunities for grading in the course. There'll be, actually, I say here 2 short writing assignments and 2 quizzes. It might be 3 writing assignments and 1 quiz, but each one will be worth 20 points, and then there'll be 20 points for class participation. Now, what does that mean? You have the opportunity, the way the course is structured is, I will get up and make some introductory remarks every class about who our guest is and what the sort of general topic is, and I will probably post some information on Blackboard in advance of the lecturer, the guest, every time, which gives you more opportunity to think of questions that you'd like to have asked. Now, what will happen is the guest will make a presentation for 20 to 30 minutes. Then we will sit down at an oak table, like a television talk show, right here in the middle of the stage, and I will interview the guest and ask them a bunch of questions about how they work, how they think, what their processes are. And I'll use the 5 terms that we just discussed as a kind of common reference point. But there may be issues that I don't cover that you'd really like to have an answer to. So when I'm done with the interview, I'll give you a little heads up a few minutes before we complete it, so that if you have a question, and ideally I would encourage you to write a question down the night before or during the talk or whatever, so that if you'd like to get up and ask a question from one of the 2 microphones, or we also have, you can ask questions via Twitter, because we're so hip. It's #understandingdesign. And that way, while I'm at the table, if you want to send questions via Twitter, you can, and I'll ask them for you at the table. But you're more than welcome, and I encourage you to ask questions at the mics. Also, the TAs, we'll see how this works. Up to now, we've had the mic right here, but these mics can be taken out of their stands and they can come around to you if you raise your hand. So we'll see how that goes, all right? So the Blackboard, we'll put everything on Blackboard. It's a great thing. The only thing we would exclude would be some of these people are very high-powered heads of major companies, and obviously I don't want to put out on the internet anything that's proprietary. So in other words, that's let's say a trade secret. It can't be too much of a secret if they're telling you, I suppose, but if they're a portion of some of these PowerPoints, if they talk about the design, let's say the technical development of a design, they might ask me not to post that on Blackboard, but otherwise we'll put everything up there. So now, if I could ask our TAs to stand up, maybe. So O, where are you? Is O still here? Yeah, there's O standing up over there. O Baxley. In the middle here is Ellie Blair with her hand up. Isabel Demetz is to your right, my left. Kate Hart is right here. And Sebastian, where's Sebastian? Over there by the projection equipment. Okay, so these characters are your TAs, and you can ask them questions about assignments, about logistics, anything like that. And please do come to class on time, because when we get started, it's just nice to have everybody seated. I will say the upside is there'll be several times when we don't go all the way to 125. It really just depends on the dynamics of the conversation. This isn't, although it resembles a TV show sometimes, it isn't one. It's not a precise, it's not exactly the same length every time. So let's talk a bit about design. Any questions thus far? Okay. You may well have them later. So how many of you are familiar with this image? Anybody? Oh, look at that, fantastic. So this is a kind of caricature of a famous logo by the great graphic designer Paul Rand. And this is a kind of lighthearted version of the logo for IBM. Get it? IBM. But the logo for IBM is a really iconic, long-lasting logo. And the reason I think it is so powerful and long-lasting is, one, the company has lasted a long time. You know, a lot of companies just flame out. They have one great product, and then that technology becomes irrelevant, and there's no more of the company. IBM has not been one of those companies. They've reinvented themselves a lot. But this is what IBM started with. You all recognize this? This is a punch card from the 1950s. This is how you used to input information to a mainframe computer. You know, I guess you used a typewriter keyboard that punched holes in the card, and then the card went into the computer, which it could only read the presence and absence of the gaps and translated into computer language. This was a punch card reader. But when you think about the look of a punch card, the horizontal bands and so forth, and you look at this, it starts to make a bit more sense. The term IBM, which is for International Business Machines, is stylized to visually represent the things that IBM was about, its core identity. And that core identity is about speed, it's about machine processing, it's about systems, and it's about enormous scale. And I guess what I think is so powerful about that logo, and the reason it's a great design, is that it communicates all those ideas very quietly in the background, but it does so relentlessly. Every time you encountered IBM, you encountered that logo. If you got a letter from them, if you saw a product, everything communicated those qualities. Now, this isn't a course about logos, but logos are a great example of design thinking, I think, because they try to solve more than one problem, communicate more than one message. Well, what are some other great designs? I think this is a pretty great design. Can anybody tell me what are some good design features of the Apple? Anybody? You can just shout it out. The stem? The stem is a nice, simple connection to the branches, and therefore it doesn't interfere with eating the apple, right? It's not in the way roots are sometimes in the way for other things. Anything else? Yeah. Great. Yep, it stands up by itself. Yeah. It's easy to hold. Ergonomically excellent. Yes. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. That's actually one of the reasons I picked this image. It's quite beautiful. Yep. Anything else? Because there's a really cool engineering performance quality that I thought all this room full of engineers would get. It is easy to bite. We're getting very close. Well, that's true. Yeah, that's right. That's right. If the seeds were on the outside, it'd be a problem. Yes. It tastes good. Excellent. I hadn't even thought of that, but that's very true. Yes. Yes, the skin. The skin. What's so brilliant is it comes in its own wrapper, its own Stay Fresh pack, right? It has this perfect sealed skin that keeps have you ever seen an apple with one bite out of it goes bad in like 4 hours, right? An apple with its whole skin on keeps it nice and moist and fresh. An engineer couldn't have come up with such a brilliant scheme. Well, maybe one did, I don't know. It's none of my business. But it's a brilliant product, I think. I'm going to flip through a number of other things that I think are great designs with a tiny bit of commentary. And then we're going to get to some more explicitly didactic material, okay? So this is an amazing design. And there's not much architecture in this class, but occasionally I'll have to give you a little bit. This is a design by a neoclassical French architect named Etienne Boulet in the late 18th century, who designed a monument to Isaac Newton. Because, by the late 18th century, Isaac Newton was a pretty cool cat. He just like changed the universe, and everybody thought he was fantastic. So he designed this monument, which was to be a monument to Newton's life called the cenotaph. And just to give you an understanding of the scale of things, those are people down there at the bottom. Okay, this was to be a gigantic sphere that you could inhabit. Have you ever been to the Maparium over at the Christian Science Center? If you haven't, you should go. There's actually a small-scale version of something very much like this, a sphere that you can walk through the inside of over at the Christian Science Center. You should check it out. It's a map of the world, but it's like a globe, but the countries are on the inside of the globe instead of on the outside. And also, it's the countries as they were in 1939. So it's kind of changed a little bit, but it's still very interesting. This was the idea that all these people would be hanging out down at the bottom looking at basically a model of the solar system. That's the sun in the center. This is a pencil sharpener designed by a great American designer called Raymond Loewy. Now what's cool about this is it's both a pencil sharpener and a really cool kind of 1930s model of modernity. It looks aerodynamic, it looks like a rocket ship, it looks forward-looking. This was a style in the Art Deco period in the United States. You'll see some other things by Loewy. He designed the Shell logo, which is for Shell Oil. He designed the Studebaker automobile, which is, this is called the Avanti. And it was a very forward-looking car, much more modern. This was designed in the 50s, so much more modern than in contemporary vehicles. This is a car designed by Norman Bell Geddes in the 1930s, a very futuristic period in Western life. This, as you know, is the Segway, another very interesting thing that is sort of maybe one of the reasons that this invention, though very popular and successful, is not as universal as maybe people thought it might be when it was invented, is that the idea that we're walking too much is probably not the correct problem to be solved. Can we agree on that? We're not a country that's necessarily walking too much. That's not really a problem that we have. This is the famous Eames lounge chair, designed by the husband and wife design team in the 1950s, Charles and Ray Eames. And they were pioneers. You might say, what's so groovy about this? They were pioneers of molded plywood, pressure molded plywood. And you'll notice that this chair is very, very modern, and it's made of materials whose structure you can see. In an old-fashioned upholstered chair, the structure is hidden by tufted material, upholstery usually. This is, for the architects in the room, this is a famous chair by Gerrit Rietveld. Now you might say, okay, why is this a great design? That does not look comfortable. And you know what? It might be the singularly most uncomfortable chair I've ever sat in. The problem to be solved here is not human comfort. The problem to be solved here is furniture that embodies the aesthetic objectives of the Dutch de style movement of the teens and 20s in the 20th century. So this was a chair that was designed to go with a house that was all planar surfaces and primary colors, that housed drawings and paintings by artists of this same vein. So in other words, the problem to be solved was not make me the most comfortable chair. The problem to be solved was, how do I make something that you could possibly sit in that's like a Dutch painting? Very different problem. Anybody ever seen one of these? This is a car made by Messerschmitt. Messerschmitt was one of the big German, Nazi German airline manufacturers. They made a lot of warplanes for Nazi Germany. Well, after the war, after Germany was defeated, and it was very poor, most of Europe was very poor, they still had factories, and they had to try to transform from making military things to making things that poor people could possibly use in a domestic way, in a non-military way. So this is a very inexpensive, very small vehicle made after World War II by an airline manufacturer to try to satisfy domestic need in Germany. There's a museum in Brookline called the Lars Anderson Museum, if you're ever interested, which has an amazing collection of unusual vehicles, and they have one of these, so you can check it out. You may or may not have seen one of these. This is called a Thonnet rocker, and it is a beautiful rocking chair made in the latter part of the 19th century, whose form and function start to merge together. The curves necessary to make the chair a rocking chair become the curves of the structure of the chair. This is interesting. This is a young Tom Cruise in a movie called Minority Report. But he was, in this film, which I don't know, is maybe 15 years old, 12 years old, something like that. He was the producers were anticipating the world of touchscreens that we now inhabit, and that will soon be the interface for all kinds of things in domestic environments. Imagine rooms that don't have lights. They have flat panels that can have whatever environment you choose on the wall, and that could be a setting sun, it could be club lighting, it could be daylight, it could be whatever you want. But this is really a prescient notion of how we're going to interface with technology. This goes back a little bit further. These are Dutch guilders prior to the euro, and beautiful example of clean design that embodies the sort of beauty, the national character, and the difficulty to forge, which are the problems to solve when it comes to designing currency. Now, how much longer we'll have paper currency, I'm not sure. You guys all have probably some kind of app on your phones that at least deals with some of your financial transactions, and I think I fully anticipate that will continue, and we'll probably have fewer and fewer transactions that require paper money. Okay, now I'm going to segue into a couple other things with my friend the mouse and the mouse 2.0. And by the way, it's not an accident that we call it a mouse. I mean, in other words, it was conceived as, what kind of human interface with a computer are we going to have? It used to be, of course, that everything was keystrokes, everything. And then they came out with a mouse. And it was like, oh my gosh, this is intuitive. I can move my arm, and I'm moving around the screen. How cool. And this is part of the whole kind of Apple revolution. But that revolution depended a lot on an understanding of design that had come before it. How many of you have read the Walter Isaacson biography of Steve Jobs? Yeah, good. The first time I offered this course, that was a requirement for the course. It didn't make a lot of sense in some ways because we didn't really follow the book. It wasn't a textbook for the course, but it is a great read. It's an enjoyable book to read, and it's really instructive because you really understand, first of all, what kind of a maniac Steve Jobs was. Second of all, for people like me who have owned nothing but Apples and have always been a first adopter of those kinds of products and always thought very well of the whole enterprise, it's also a little eye-opening because he was also really a jerk. I mean, jerk is understating it. He was really kind of a nasty guy, which is not how we acolytes had understood him. We thought he was great and Bill Gates was terrible, and it's very simple and clear. And Apple's advertising always played up that distinction. I don't know if you remember the old Mac versus PC ads, where there was one kind of attractive young guy who was the affable Mac representative, and then there was a kind of nerdy guy who was the PC, and it was always clear that the cool guy was the Mac guy. Now I think that's far less clear. Anyway, what Jobs did was looked at great design, great product design mostly, but he embodied, it was the most important deliverable for him in any product. He says in the book that he learned from his stepfather, and he lived with adoptive parents, and his stepfather was, if not full-time, he was a fine woodworker, and in his garage he had a shop. And when he made things, he always impressed upon young Steve Jobs that it was really important that everything not only looked great where people could see, but that if anybody ever took apart what you made, it should look great there too. And you all know, everybody who's ever built anything knows exactly that kind of ethical dilemma that you arrive at when you say, gosh, I'd really like to get this done. Nobody will ever see that, right? It's inside the box, nobody will ever see it. Well, Jobs was obsessed with making sure that everything looked great no matter where, okay? This, by the way, is flatware by the great Danish designer Arne Jacobsen, who's just a brilliant mid-century designer, also designed the famous Womb chair. Zooming out a little bit, another fantastic design, solves a real problem, is the plan for the city of Palma Nova, Italy, around 1600. Can anybody tell me what the primary purpose of this city plan was? A fortress, did you say? Yeah, guarded. Well, it's defense, military defense. This is, prior to, as military weaponry advanced, the idea of a city wall started to become less important. When you had they created giant armaments that could fire over or through city walls, the idea that you were going to save yourself by having a big wall around your city started to fall away. But this was kind of like the last moment of a city designed from the ground up, right? All at once and executed entirely for defense purposes. And if we were going to talk more about this, I would point to the geometries that they chose at the corners. At each corner there's a complicated network of places to fire down on anybody who might be trying to scale the walls, so that it was really carefully and mathematically, geometrically designed to maximize your ability to kill anybody who would try to attack your town. And this is really like the best example that we have. Now, if you ever go to Paris, by the way, you should go to, there's a place called Hôtel des Invalides. And Hôtel des Invalides is a giant complex, but basically it's where it was built by Napoleon for all of the wounded soldiers who had fought in his wars. And they were afforded a place of tremendous honor to stay out their days at Hôtel des Invalides. There was a church and everything, but it was very honorable. Well, now it's been divided into a bunch of separate museums, and one of them has all of the defensive fortifications around, models of all the defensive fortifications around all of France. And it's so interesting, like where they had to make defenses from attacks by water, where they had to do them in the mountains, where they had to do them on broad open land. Each was a different defensive challenge, and it's super interesting. If you have the chance, you should take a look, but I digress. Let's get back to it. I'm going to show you just a couple of images of some contemporary artwork. This is by the great British artist Andy Goldsworthy, and what he does, and I would say this is very much a design decision, is he takes things found in nature and assembles them in unique ways, and then, in other words, composes them in unique ways, sometimes certainly not natural ways, and then takes a picture of it as though it were found in nature. So here's one. It's composed of leaves that are woven together. And then this one is particularly cool, I think. This is he cast a piece of ice around a tree and then pulled away the form that he cast it in. So you see this perfectly natural thing, ice in the winter. What's unusual about that? Well, what's unusual about that is it doesn't usually look like this, okay? And this next one I just love. Here's some just boulders in the grassy lands, probably in like Scotland or the north of England. He's found a series of wildflowers and taken the leaves off of the wildflowers and used them to outline the contour of the rocks. It's completely natural, and yet it's completely man-made. It's really quite a stunning thing. What does this really mean? It means that design is about some control over your perception or the perception of the user or participant for whom you are designing. You need to be able to see things from more than one point of view, as I've said. How many of you have seen this image before? Yeah, okay, good. I tried to get one that you probably couldn't go through high school without seeing. This is the famous image of either an old woman looking down with her chin on her chest or a young woman with her head up looking away. What I like about this, of course, is you have to choose which point of view you're going to take. You cannot see both at the same time, right? I mean, your brain just doesn't work that way. We had a guest in the first, this is now the third time I've taught this class. In the first class, we had a guest who is a performance artist, and he talked about, he has a one-man show. His name is Jack Hitt, and he talked about, the name of the show is Making Up the Truth. Making Up the Truth. And he talked about the brain science that confirms what we're seeing right here, which is that our brains have to make stories that we can believe, that we can rationalize, that we can understand. And so we can look at very incomplete pictures, and then our brains fill it in, and when asked, what was that thing? It was just a series of a few dots. We say, oh, that was a sheriff arresting a drunken horse. And he's like, what are you talking about? That was just a few dots. Well, your brain needs to make a story that you can believe. And I love this because you have to make one story or the other. I'm going to quickly show you some design that is generally considered to be elegant, simple, good quality design, and you'll see how it segues into our other stuff. This is the work of a great designer named Dieter Rams. Designs all kinds of things for Braun. You've probably seen a watch like this, or certainly a clock like that. You probably don't see calculators like that anymore because nobody has a calculator, or for simple stuff anyway. Oftentimes, design ideas come from very simple, natural phenomena. And things like bubbles can lead to elegant lights. Beautiful, simple design finds its way into everything from, hairbrushes and massagers to computers, the original Mac. You'll see a tremendously strong connection between early Braun design, early German Braun design, and later design at Apple. I mean, this is unbelievably one-to-one. Look at these 4 comparisons. So let's remember, empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. So understanding your audience is what empathize is about. Seeing things from their point of view and testing their responses. So you can have different audiences. You could have hipsters, grandparents, people from Japan, babies. You can have all kinds of different audiences, and they come to the table with different priorities, and you need to understand what they are. Babies, they kind of like to be warm and dry. Those are 2 things, and fed. Those are 3 things that they really like. You have to define what the problem is. Understanding, this is what I'm going to go into a little depth on this second one because it's important. Understanding the question, what is the problem you are trying to solve? There's another term that I like that sometimes is used in engineering called problem seeking. We talk so much about problem solving. It's important to remember sometimes you have to seek out the problem or question the question. So let's start with the question. What is a car? Is it a horseless carriage? That's what they started out as, and that's what they looked like. Why? Because the problem to be solved was simply one of propulsion. We've got carriages, we have horses, but they require us to feed them and house them, and they're a pain, and they don't do everything we want all the time. Now we have this thing that's got an engine that will replace the horse, so let's put an engine in the carriage, and this is why early cars looked the way they did. Because they weren't answering the question, what is a car, the way we would today. They were saying, it's simply a carriage without a horse. And that was true even, for a while, not just that first sort of crappy one, but, nice ones. You'll notice there was a real distinction between the drivers. Look at where they're driving in this picture. It's just like if there were horses there. It's just that there's not horses. Just like it, but no horses. Well, how about this? If it's not a horseless carriage, is it still kind of a livery vehicle? By that I mean something where someone else drives you around. And that's still true. Now, this doesn't look like a carriage, but I'll tell you, this is a super important distinction in cars, the design of cars. And this has meaning today because different markets have different appetites. And I know we have a lot of students from China. There are a lot of car companies that make exactly the same car that they make in the West for China, but they make it 1.5 feet longer. Why? Because a lot more people in China have drivers. The people who can afford nice cars, a lot more people have drivers. And therefore, the owner of the car is not driving it, the way is the case oftentimes here, but is being driven in it. And this is the distinction I'm making with this image. These cars, these cars from the 20s or teens, are still really designed, and they look like they're designed, where the owner is not the one driving. The owner is the one being driven around, okay? Big difference, different problem to be solved. Like if you're being driven around, the sportiness of the handling is not really so much of an issue. Okay. Then everything changes. Henry Ford's Model T is a car that you drive. You don't get driven around in it. It's not just for the boss to get driven around in. You drive it. So not long after that, once the owner is driving it, well then, hey, can we have a race car? Sure, of course you can. So by the 30s, you have cars that look a lot more like cars that we recognize. Oh, I get it. Okay, a red sports car. I think somebody's having a crisis. And then we get, then this is what it emerges as. But that's not the end of the evolution of the question, what is a car? Because now, as you guys know, as we make our way into the so-called sharing economy, we'll talk more about that later, at a later session, maybe a car is not so much about identity anymore. Maybe it's about a commodity, like just a regular family car or a smart car, or maybe it's even infrastructure, like a zip car or an MIT city car. We had the designer of this project in Understanding Design last session. By the way, on the Blackboard side, I've left a few good PowerPoint presentations from last term up there that you're welcome to look at in the course materials section if you're interested in doing that. Now, why do people buy cars? That's completely different. And this is also a design issue. Well, there's some cars that say, I'm practical. There's some cars that say, I'm a stud. There's some cars that say, I'm thoughtful. There's cars that say, I'm a really good parent. And then there are cars, well, I think you know what these cars say. But let's also ask another, let's do this exercise for a couple of other things very quickly. What is a music player? Well, it started out like this. This was a music player, a hand-cranked thing for entertaining people in your living room. And it was fantastic. It would come, you'd buy the Victrola with all the music in it. I inherited one from my great aunt. It's the coolest thing. It's from 1909, and when she bought it, it's got this beautiful cabinet, and in the cabinet, it came with all the albums. You had a complete collection of music that you got with the music player. Amazing. Then it becomes a kind of piece of furniture in the mid-century. Then a slightly more portable piece of furniture in the 60s. Then really portable in the 60s and 70s. Yep, I'm old enough. The first things I bought were 45s, like your parents, you know. Michael Jackson's ABC. What can I say? So a portable player. Then, of course, cassettes. Even more portable. They didn't skip. Hey, you can record your own. Uh-oh. Radical development. Suddenly it's a very different thing. It's not just a music player, it's a music recorder. And what does this lead to? The incredible boombox. Oh my God, it was the coolest thing. They just got bigger and bigger. I don't know how many of you have seen Spike Lee's great movie, Do the Right Thing? Oh, really? You guys are missing out. You got to check it out. It's a great, great movie. I think it's just this year. It's 25 years old. It's from 1989. In it, there's a character named Raheem who has a gigantic boombox. And it captures that period beautifully. It's like so big. And of course, it's a public statement and everything. And the evolution of these music players into things that were about public performance was really interesting. And then a revolution, this happened in the early 80s, the Walkman. What? Suddenly, I can have my music, and you can have your music, and we're all listening and not bothering anybody else. And so it just changed everything. Then, of course, as you know, another revolution, the iPod. And then even tinier iPods. But the real revolution with the iPod was iTunes, right? Because it was all about syncing everything, buying and syncing your devices, and amazing. It changed everything. Surely it can't get more interesting than that. Wait a second. Guess what? You don't even have to select what music to play. We'll do that for you too. It's called Pandora. But what if I don't like what you select? Okay, fine. How about Spotify? The point is, this world just continues to transform, and the nature of the problem, is it hardware, is it software, is it curation, selecting what to play? This changes. And if you ask the question differently, the answer will be different. You know, if I asked the question in the 1960s, what kind of music player should I get? It might quickly devolve into a question of furniture design, right? Well, I like mahogany. Oh, well, I like something white and clean. It would have nothing to do whatsoever with the question that gets asked around Spotify, Pandora, and the like. Finally, my third and last example here. What is a computer? You probably can sense where I'm going here. Let's start with the Rayovac. This is when both my parents got out of college and worked at IBM together. This is the kind of stuff that, this is not an IBM, I think this is a Sperry Univac. But this is what computers were, right? This is not as powerful as your phone, but this is what like giant insurance companies and warehouse stores would use. And you've seen all this, right? And then, of course, there was a revolution that said, hey, wait a minute, what if not just companies used computers, but small, not just big companies, but small businesses? Like this thing here was considered revolutionary because a small business could have a whole computing system. And then, of course, there'd be the very earliest sort of personal computer. But Steve Jobs' revolution was to say, it's not about the computer, it's about it being a completely user-friendly device that he talks about. I want it to be as ubiquitous as a toaster and as easy to use as a toaster. All the things we looked at before, not only were they much bigger, they involved incredibly complex interface. The whole kind of Apple revolution was to say, this is going to be like an appliance. This isn't a complicated thing. This isn't infrastructure. This is going to be like a light switch. And that was what the Macintosh revolution really was, because it was about empathy. I can't stress that enough. The difference back then between a PC and a Mac was the difference between night and day. It was the difference between a PC, IBM, and Microsoft telling you how the world was going to be, click, Alt, Delete, and you just clicking. That, pointing and clicking. It was revolutionary, and it was entirely about empathy. And then, they made all kinds of different variations to solve aesthetic problems as well. So, the question of ideate, what exactly do we mean by that? Ideation is brainstorming, a vision using multiple approaches, each focusing on a different aspect of a potential solution. I'm going to give you a couple of architectural examples here just for brevity's sake, but we'll see a lot of ideation in this course. This is a view by the great American architect Frank Lloyd Wright of his vision of an ideal suburb. And it's called Broadacre City, and it involved a kind of anti-urban idea. That is, he thought cities, like many people in American history, he thought cities were not the greatest accomplishment of civilization, but cesspools of corruption and evil. Thomas Jefferson basically felt the same way. Lots of other people don't feel that way. But so this was a way of idealizing what a suburb could be with tall buildings and everybody having personal helicopters and all kinds of crazy ideas. And this is the great man himself. This is a sketch by Leonardo da Vinci, another unalloyed genius, attempting one of his many attempts at inventing flying machines in the 1400s. A little bit ahead of his time. And these sketches are examples of ideation. Okay, how could we do this? What's the challenge here? There's the amount of air we need to move, there's gearing, how are we going to do this? And so this is kind of freestyle sketching. We also see ideas about the organization of an entire community. This is Ebenezer Howard's plan for a garden city in the late 19th, early 20th century. So we also, we go from ideation to prototyping, actually coming up with actual examples of attempts. And so I thought for this I might show you prototypes, testing, surveying, measuring, revising, beginning again. Does anybody really do that? Well, yes, they do. This is just a small chart of some of Apple's stuff over the years. I mean, the incredible number of versions that we've seen really speaks to a just constant, I said that list of 5 terms is really a circle. This is the evidence of that. Whenever they have something, they test. They test with their users. They try to figure out what's bad about this. How can we make it better? Smaller, faster, more functional? What can we do? And I find that to be very, very impressive. This is the evolution of the sort of post-Mac accoutrement from iPod to iPad. And again, it's hard to believe, since we've all lived through this, right, that all these changes have gone on just in the last few years, but they have. This one I also like, the evolution of everything from British Airways flight attendant uniforms to boxes of cornflakes to telephones to Queen Elizabeth. to police cars, and to book covers for George Orwell's 1984. I just love the idea that each, like, let's say 1984. This is great. How many of you are aware of George Orwell's 1984? There you go. Okay. Our high schools are still doing their job. Good. Orwell is just one of the great writers ever. But what the impact of his book is in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s varies a great deal because the context varies, right? In other words, in one setting, it's right after World War II. In another setting, it's the beginning of the Cold War. In another decade, it's at the end of the Cold War. The context for what the message of George Orwell's book is changes, and therefore the design changes. For those of you who aren't designers, I thought I'd give you literally a little kind of pen and ink sketch to wireframe sketch to 3D model. This is just of a designer's work storage table, but this is kind of the process that designers go through. And then you test. How do you measure success? And it goes back to the nature of the question or of the problem. What exactly are you measuring? Well, you have to measure what you are, the parameters you're trying to design to. If it's really simple, I guess you can just measure it with a tape measure, but usually it's more like customer satisfaction, and all of the things in gray are the variables that make up customer satisfaction. You can test using, or the testing there's sort of a third of this loop. This is a kind of 12-step version of our 5-step thing for a specific business, and you see a third of it is prototyping and user testing. So it's really critical. Some aspects of a design can be quantified. What about those that can't be quantified? And sometimes those are the most challenging ones. And when you get into realms like fashion and beauty and things like this, you still have to figure out what you're trying to do and how you're going to measure it. So it's interesting, it's tricky. So just to review, we're almost there, folks. Stay with me, home stretch. Empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. That's what we're going to be doing this whole semester. We're going to cover all kinds of things. Advertising is advertising for education, by the way. Branding, communication, all these things. We've got the head of the civil and environmental engineering here at Northeastern, probably the chair for a lot of you, Jerome Hajar. He's going to be our third or fourth guest, talking about a brand new way of designing for earthquakes that is completely different than anything you've ever seen before. I think you'll like that. We have all kinds of great guests. The president of Merrimack College will be one of our guests. He's a real innovator when it comes to education. But our next guest is perhaps our most impressive, the very first guest in the class. Karen Kaplan is the CEO of Hill Holiday. It's the largest advertising agency in Boston and the 13th largest in the United States. It's a major player in advertising, branding, and positioning. She's fantastic. She has really innovative ideas about how to communicate and sell in the social media era. And I think you'll enjoy it very much. That's next Monday. I'll see you then at 11:45. Thanks very much.